The shoreline is silent until it isn't. A distant line appears on the horizon, dark and endless, stretching further than the eye can measure. Ships, hundreds of them. The sea itself seems to move with purpose, carrying something far more dangerous than soldiers. It carries inevitability. On the beaches of Japan, the samurai stand still, watching, not charging, not shouting, just waiting. Because what approaches them is not an enemy they understand. It is larger, more organized, and terrifyingly efficient. Behind those sails is the force of Kublai Khan, a ruler who had already bent entire civilizations to his will. And now, his eyes were fixed on Japan. But what happened next was something no empire could control. Decades earlier, the Mongol expansion had already rewritten the rules of power across continents. Cities fell not just because of numbers, but because of fear. Entire populations collapsed before the Mongols even arrived, broken by reputation alone. This wasn't just conquest, it was psychological domination. And when Genghis Khan died, that machine didn't stop, it evolved. Under Kublai Khan, it became something even more structured, more calculated. Japan was not just another target, it was a statement, a distant island that had refused to submit. And in the logic of the Mongol Empire, refusal was not an option that could be ignored. It had to be corrected, completely. But Japan was different, not because it was stronger, but because it thought differently. The samurai were not trained for mass warfare. They were warriors of identity, of personal honor, of direct confrontation, one against one, face to face. Meanwhile, the Mongols fought like a system, coordinated, disciplined, overwhelming. Arrows would fall before a samurai even reached his opponent. Explosive weapons would disrupt formations that didn't even exist in Japanese tactics. It wasn't just a battle of numbers, it was a clash of philosophies. And that is what made this encounter so dangerous. Because when two completely different ways of fighting collide, one of them usually disappears. The question was simple: would Japan adapt fast enough or be erased before it even understood what it was facing?
The first impact didn't look like chaos. It looked like confusion. When the Mongol forces landed, they didn't wait for formal challenges or ritualized combat. They moved as one. Lines advanced together. Drums echoed across the shoreline, not as decoration, but as command. Arrows dark into the sky in coordinated waves, falling not on individuals, but on entire zones. For the samurai, this was something unfamiliar. There was no clear opponent to face, no single enemy to challenge, just a system designed to overwhelm. And for a brief moment, it worked. On the islands of Tsushima and Iki, resistance collapsed faster than expected, not because the defenders lacked courage, but because they were facing something built to ignore it. The Mongols didn't seek duels, they didn't pause, they didn't negotiate. They advanced with precision, removing obstacles without hesitation. Villages were silenced, defensive lines dissolved, and word began to spread across Japan, not as detailed reports, but as fragments of fear. Something was coming, and it didn't fight like anything they had seen before. By the time the Mongols reached Hakata Bay, the tension had already changed. This was no longer a distant threat, it was here. Thousands of soldiers, organized into a force that moved like a single organism, stood ready to push deeper into Japanese territory. And facing them were samurai who now understood something critical. This was not a battle they could win by fighting the way they always had. Adaptation was no longer a choice, it was survival. But adaptation takes time, and time was exactly what they didn't have. The Mongols pressed forward, testing defenses, probing weaknesses, forcing reactions. Every movement had purpose, every advance was calculated. And yet something unexpected began to happen. The terrain slowed them, the unfamiliar coastline disrupted their rhythm, and at night, the samurai changed. They stopped waiting, they stopped reacting, and instead, they began to hunt. Small boats cut through the darkness, silent, controlled. Samurai boarding Mongol ships under the cover of night, turning the enemy's strength, their fleet, into vulnerability. What was once an unstoppable force began to fracture, not through direct confrontation, but through pressure, constant, unpredictable, psychological. And just as the balance of the conflict began to shift, the sky itself changed. Because what came next wasn't strategy, it wasn't skill, it was something far more uncontrollable.
The wind didn't rise slowly. It arrived with intent. At first, it was just a shift, a pressure in the air that felt wrong. Then the sea began to respond. Waves grew sharper, heavier, as if something beneath them had been disturbed. On the Mongol ships, tensions spread. Commanders who had crossed entire continents suddenly faced something they could not predict, not organize, not command. And within hours, control was gone. The storm didn't negotiate. It tore through the fleet with violent precision. Ships collided, anchors snapped, structures splintered under forces they were never built to endure. Soldiers who had marched through empires were now trapped in chaos, not against an enemy they could see, but against an environment that erased strategy itself. The coordination that made the Mongols unstoppable on land became useless on open water. Orders disappeared in the wind. Formations meant nothing. And just like that, the most powerful invasion force of its time was reduced to fragments scattered across a hostile sea. On the shores, the samurai watched, not celebrating, not charging, just observing, because what unfolded in front of them wasn't victory in the traditional sense, it was something far more unsettling. The realization that even the most disciplined force, the most calculated empire, could be broken by something beyond human control. And yet, for the Japanese, this moment became something else entirely. It became meaning. They called it kamikaze, the divine wind. Not just a storm, but protection, a force that had chosen a side. And that belief didn't just explain what happened, it reshaped how they saw themselves, not as survivors, but as a nation that could not be conquered, a land that was somehow untouchable. But belief can be dangerous, because it replaces doubt with certainty, and certainty can blind even the strongest societies. What most people don't realize is that this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of something much larger, because Kublai Khan didn't accept failure, not like this, not from a force he believed was inferior. The storm may have stopped him once, but he wasn't done. He would return, and next time, the scale would be unimaginable.
The second invasion didn't begin with movement, it began with silence. Across the sea, something was gathering again. But this time, it wasn't just another attempt. It was preparation on a scale that felt unnatural. Shipyards worked without pause. Resources were redirected. Entire regions were mobilized. Under the command of Kublai Khan, this was no longer an invasion. It was a correction, a response to humiliation. And when the fleet finally moved, it wasn't a line on the horizon anymore. It was the horizon itself. Two massive forces advanced toward Japan from different directions, designed to converge like a closing trap. One from Korea, another from southern China. Together, they carried a number that felt almost impossible for the time, over 100,000 men. Not just soldiers, but engineers, archers, sailors, and commanders trained to operate as a single system. This wasn't just about landing, it was about overwhelming, surrounding, and ending resistance before it could organize. There would be no second chance, no retreat forced by weather. At least that was the expectation. But Japan had changed. The samurai had learned. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Along the coast of Hakata, defensive walls now stretched across key landing points, barriers designed not to stop the Mongols entirely, but to slow them, to disrupt their rhythm, because now the Japanese understood something critical. They could not defeat the Mongols in open formation, so they chose something else. Control the pace, control the terrain, force the invader to fight on unfamiliar terms. And it worked. Partially. When the Mongol forces arrived, they found resistance that didn't break immediately. Landings became harder, progress slowed, time stretched, and in warfare, time is never neutral. The longer an operation takes, the more fragile it becomes. Supplies thin, coordination weakens, pressure builds, and slowly, the massive force that was meant to overwhelm began to stall. But the most unsettling part wasn't the delay. It was what happened at night, because once again, the samurai didn't wait. They adapted further. Small groups moving in darkness, targeting isolated ships, cutting down coordination piece by piece, not seeking direct victory, but erosion. Constant pressure, a psychological weight that never lifted. Sleep became uncertain, control became unstable, and for the Mongols, something unfamiliar began to grow. Doubt. And when doubt enters a system built on absolute coordination, everything begins to fracture. But even then, the invasion had not failed. Not yet. Because despite the resistance, despite the pressure, the Mongol force was still there, still massive, still capable. And then, the sky changed again.
This time, no one ignored the signs. The air grew heavier days before anything happened. The sea became unpredictable, restless, as if it was preparing for something no army could face. Even the Mongols, veterans of countless campaigns, understood that something was wrong. But retreat wasn't an option. Not after everything that had been invested, not after the scale of this operation. They stayed. And that decision would define everything. When the storm finally arrived, it wasn't just powerful, it was overwhelming. Waves rose like moving walls, crashing into ships already strained by weeks at sea. Anchors failed, ropes snapped, entire vessels were thrown against each other, splintering under pressure that no strategy could withstand. Communication collapsed instantly. There were no commands, no formations, no control. Just survival, and even that was uncertain. The fleet, the largest force ever sent against Japan, began to disappear. Not all at once, but piece by piece, hour by hour, as the storm consumed what had taken years to build. Soldiers who had crossed continents, who had faced organized resistance and crushed it, now found themselves powerless, not against an enemy army, but against something that didn't think, didn't hesitate, didn't stop. And when it ended, there was almost nothing left to command. On land, the samurai once again witnessed something they couldn't fully explain. Not victory in battle, but survival through something beyond battle. The narrative became clear, reinforced. Japan was protected, chosen, untouchable. The idea of the kamikaze was no longer just belief, it was identity. But beneath that identity, something more complex remained. Because the truth is, the samurai did not defeat 100,000 Mongols in direct combat. They didn't overpower them. They didn't break them in a single decisive clash. What happened was far more unsettling. A combination of resistance, adaptation, and forces no one could control. And that raises a question that most people avoid. If the storms had not come, would Japan still exist the same way today? Because history often celebrates survival as strength, but sometimes survival is something else entirely. Something unpredictable, something uncomfortable, and far more fragile than it appears.